Have you ever met someone who could understand almost anything, except the people around them? Someone who sees patterns instantly, predicts outcomes before anyone else, and still lies awake at 2 a.m. replaying one awkward conversation from 3 days ago? Because the psychology of extremely high IQ isn't just about brilliance. It's about what happens when a mind moves faster than the world around it. And if you've ever felt like you notice too much, think too deeply, or struggle to just be normal in rooms where everyone else seems relaxed, this might feel uncomfortably familiar. When people hear high IQ, they usually imagine advantage. They imagine success, recognition, maybe even a kind of effortless superiority. The gifted kid, the genius founder, the quiet person in the corner who somehow already solved the problem everyone else is still talking about. But in real life, extremely high intelligence is often much less glamorous than people think. Because a very high IQ mind doesn't just process information better, it also processes contradiction faster. It sees subtext faster. It notices hypocrisy, emotional shifts, hidden motives, future consequences, social patterns, and logical cracks that most people miss. And that can make life feel less like a gift and more like living without psychological blur. Most people are protected by a little bit of mental softness, a little emotional fog, a little ability to move on without analyzing every layer. But people with extremely high IQ often don't have that luxury. Their minds don't stop at what happened. They keep moving. Why did it happen? What does it mean? What does it predict? What does it reveal? What am I missing? What will this become in 6 months? And that's where the hidden psychology begins. Because one of the most misunderstood things about very intelligent people is this. Many of them are not struggling because they think too highly of themselves. They're struggling because they can't turn themselves off. A powerful mind can be a beautiful thing, but a mind that never powers down can become its own kind of prison. That's why some extremely high IQ people look calm on the outside and deeply exhausted on the inside. They may seem detached, but internally, they're running thousands of silent calculations a day. In conversation, they're hearing the words, the tone, the contradictions, the insecurity behind the confidence, the emotional need hidden inside the joke. At work, they're not just doing the task. They're seeing the broken system behind the task. In relationships, they're not just hearing, "I'm fine." They're hearing every signal that says the opposite. And here's the strange part. Being right often doesn't make them feel better. It makes them feel lonelier. Because when you see too much too early, you often have to watch reality catch up to you in slow motion. That's a deeply isolating experience. A lot of very intelligent people learn this early in life. Maybe as kids, they were praised for being smart, mature, advanced. Adults loved their vocabulary, their memory, the way they could reason like someone much older. But emotionally, that kind of praise can quietly become a trap. Because when a child is valued mostly for being impressive, they may start to believe their worth lives in performance, not presence. So they become the one who knows, the one who solves, the one who explains, the one who doesn't need help. And later, that same person may become an adult who can decode complex systems, but struggles to admit they're overwhelmed. Someone who can explain human behavior in detail, but feels strangely disconnected from their own emotional needs. Someone who looks self-sufficient, but secretly feels unseen. This is one of the first paradoxes of extremely high IQ. The smarter the person, the easier it becomes for others to mistake competence for emotional immunity. But intelligence does not cancel pain. Sometimes it intensifies it. Because high IQ individuals often don't just feel pain. They understand it while it's happening. They analyze it. They trace it to childhood, to attachment, to personality dynamics, to social structures, to unresolved wounds, to patterns repeating across generations. They don't just say, "I feel bad." They know exactly why they feel bad. And yet, insight doesn't always heal. In fact, one of the cruelest psychological realities is that understanding your patterns is not the same as being free from them. A person can know they're overthinking and still overthink. They can understand their attachment style and still panic when someone pulls away. They can recognize their perfectionism and still feel ashamed when they fall short, because the mind can explain the wound, but it cannot always soothe it. And for people with extremely high IQ, That gap between understanding and peace can become deeply frustrating. They know too much to be naive, but not enough to escape being human. That frustration shows up in ways people don't always notice. It can look like procrastination, but underneath it is often paralysis, not laziness, overcalculation. They can see so many possibilities, so many flaws, so many future problems that action starts to feel psychologically expensive. While others move forward with partial clarity, they may wait for a level of certainty that never arrives. It can look like arrogance, but sometimes it's just social fatigue. They've learned that saying what they really think often makes people uncomfortable, so they either go quiet or they wear a sharper tone as armor. It can look like emotional distance, but often it's fear. Fear of not being understood. Fear of simplifying themselves just to be accepted. Fear of finally being honest and realizing the connection wasn't strong enough to hold the truth. And maybe most painfully, it can look like underachievement. Because not every extremely intelligent person becomes exceptional in visible ways. Some burn out early, some get lost in overthinking, some become cynical, some hide, some drift. Some stop trying because the world they were told they'd conquer feels too shallow, too political, too repetitive, too emotionally illogical. A high IQ mind often struggles in systems built for compliance rather than depth. That's why some of the brightest people you'll ever meet don't look successful in the conventional sense. They may be underemployed, misunderstood, emotionally complex, or living far below their potential. Not because they lack ability, but because ability alone is never the whole story. And that's where another hidden trait appears: alienation. Many extremely intelligent people spend years feeling like outsiders without knowing exactly why. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. A feeling that conversations stay on the surface too long. A feeling that group dynamics are strangely performative. A feeling that people say what sounds right instead of what's true. A feeling that everyday life requires more pretending than they can tolerate. So they adapt. Some become social chameleons. They learn how to appear lighter, simpler, more easygoing. They strategically lower the intensity. They hide how deeply they think because they've learned that being fully visible can make others defensive. Some turn to humor. If you can make people laugh, they don't notice how different your mind really is. Some become obsessed with mastery. If they can't feel connected, they can at least feel excellent. And some withdraw completely. Not because they hate people, but because they're tired of translating themselves. There's a quote-worthy truth here. Being highly intelligent often means spending years trying to decide whether you are too much, or just surrounded by too little depth. But high IQ doesn't only affect how someone sees the world, it affects how they see themselves. Very intelligent people often develop an intense inner critic, not because they're weak, but because they can imagine better versions of everything, especially themselves. They can see how they could have answered better, loved better, worked better, chosen better, used their potential better. Their imagination becomes a mirror that rarely flatters them. And because they're often praised for their mind, mistakes can feel identity-threatening. If your intelligence becomes your safe place, failure doesn't just feel disappointing. It feels personal. It feels like a crack in the only trait people consistently valued in you. So some high IQ individuals become perfectionists. Some become avoidant. Some stop starting things they care about because unfinished potential feels safer than tested reality. That's why brilliance can coexist with self-sabotage. Because the fear isn't always, what if I fail? Sometimes it's, what if I try fully, and my mind isn't enough? And behind that fear is something even deeper: grief. The grief of wasted potential. The grief of not being met. The grief of seeing what things could be and living in what they are. The grief of being called gifted when what you really needed was guidance, emotional safety, and a place to belong. A lot of people with extremely high IQ carry a quiet sadness that doesn't make sense from the outside. Their life may look fine. Their abilities are obvious. Their awareness is sharp. But internally, they may feel tired of carrying a mind that turns everything into 1,000 moving parts. Because intelligence can expand your world, but it can also expand your exposure to pain. You see how fragile people are. You see how often love is mixed with fear. You see how systems reward confidence over truth. You see how many people are acting from wounds they never name. You see how easy it is for entire lives to be built on avoidance. And once you see these things, you can't fully unsee them. But here's the part that matters most. High IQ becomes psychologically dangerous only when a person starts worshiping the mind and abandoning the self, because eventually, no amount of intelligence can replace emotional integration. A person can have a brilliant mind and still need rest, still need softness, still need people who don't just admire them, but understand them, still need experiences that cannot be solved, only felt. This is where many extremely intelligent people begin to heal, not by becoming smarter, but by becoming more whole, by learning that not every problem is a puzzle, that not every emotion needs to be dissected immediately, that peace is not the reward for perfect understanding, that relationships are not debates to win, but realities to inhabit, that being exceptional is not the same as being connected. And maybe the deepest shift of all is this, realizing that your mind is a tool, not your identity. Because once a person with very high IQ stops asking, how do I prove my intelligence, and starts asking, how do I live in a way that feels honest, peaceful, and real? Everything changes. They begin to choose environments that value depth instead of noise. They become more careful about who gets access to their inner world. They stop over-explaining themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. They learn that loneliness is not always a sign that something is wrong. Sometimes it's the cost of refusing shallow connection, and they discover that emotional maturity is not thinking less deeply. It's knowing when depth no longer serves you. That's a powerful idea, because the healthiest, highly intelligent people are not the ones who know the most. They're the ones who know when to stop turning life into a mental experiment. They know when to leave the conversation instead of mentally rewriting it for 3 hours. They know when to accept uncertainty instead of trying to outthink it. They know when a relationship is confusing because it's unhealthy, not because they haven't analyzed it enough yet. They know when their gifts are being used in the wrong room. And maybe most importantly, they stop punishing themselves for being different. If you relate to any of this, maybe the goal is not to become easier for the world to digest. Maybe the goal is to understand the cost of your awareness without letting it harden you. Maybe the goal is to build a life where your intelligence doesn't isolate you from your humanity. Because the truth is, an extremely high IQ can help you understand almost everything except the one thing that matters most if you neglect it: how to be at peace inside your own mind. And peace is not anti-intellectual. Peace is not ignorance. Peace is not thinking less in some shallow, simplistic way. Peace is when your mind finally realizes it doesn't have to carry your entire identity alone. That's when intelligence becomes wisdom, not when you can predict everyone, not when you can win every argument, not when you can see through every mask in the room, but when you can see clearly and still stay soft, when you can understand human complexity without losing compassion, when you can feel your difference without turning it into a wound, when you can be brilliant without needing brilliance to justify your existence. Because in the end, the psychology of extremely high IQ is not just about cognitive power. It's about what happens when a human being can perceive more, anticipate more, and analyze more than most people around them, and still has to learn the same painful lesson every person eventually learns. A sharp mind can make you exceptional, but only a grounded soul can make you whole. And maybe that's why some of the smartest people in the world still feel strangely unfinished, not because they lack intelligence, but because no one ever taught them that being deeply aware is only half the journey. The other half is learning how to live with what you know. So if you are that person, the one who thinks too much, sees too much, feels exhausted by the noise, and sometimes wonders whether your mind is a gift or a burden, remember this. You were never meant to use intelligence as a hiding place. You were never meant to carry life only in your head, and you do not need to be less deep to feel more alive. Sometimes the strongest thing a brilliant mind can do is finally let itself be human. And once that happens, the mind stops feeling like a cage. It starts feeling like home.